So it's been a good start with two talks. I had originally planned to talk about the Camptocamp's DevOps stack. So if you saw this in the announcement from a few weeks ago, I'm sorry, this is not what I'm going to talk about tonight, because we talked about it and decided it was not this project was not really ready for prime time. So I might be talking about it in the future. So instead, I'll be talking about K9s. K9s is a tool to manage Kubernetes resources and Kubernetes clusters. And I started using it a few weeks ago, and we started implementing it inside our courses, our training curriculum for Docker and Kubernetes, and it's been really great. So I wanted to share with you how you can use this tool. I know some of you know about it because I saw, for example, that Eric has been commenting on videos about this tool on YouTube. So my name is Raphaël Pinson. I work for Camptocamp, and I'm an infrastructure developer specializing in automation, so Popeye, Terraform, Kubernetes, and all the things around it. I'll pass on this. This is a Camptocamp. We're currently based in Lausanne, Olten in Switzerland, as well as in France and Germany. And we do a lot of things around automation, from config management to provisioning to metrics, obviously Kubernetes, Docker, and all the technologies that go with this. So when it comes to Kubernetes and looking into Kubernetes resources, there's several UIs that are available. The most famous one, obviously, is the Kubernetes Dashboard itself, which is the standard way of looking at resources through a web UI. But there's also other web UIs that are available. One that is maybe a bit less known in the Kubernetes side is Portainer, which is also an interface to look into Docker resources. So you can plug it to Docker socket and watch your Docker containers and volumes and so on. But you can also plug it to Kubernetes and watch, have a look at your Kubernetes resources. So it lets you inspect the resources, go into them, see the YAML, manifests, see a description of your resources, and so on. And one that is quite powerful as well is Lens. What do all these UIs have in common? They're all in-cluster deployments. They're all web interfaces that you deploy inside your cluster. It means that you need to manage the permissions to access these tools. And it means that whichever tool has been chosen for your cluster, well, that's the one you need to use. So it changes from cluster to cluster. You might connect to your cluster at some client and have one type of interface, or maybe you have an OpenShift and it has a specific OpenShift interface, or Rancher has its own interface. All these UIs have their own interfaces. And what they have in common as well is that they're web interfaces, so you need to click on links to access the different parts. And while this is easy to use, it may not be the most efficient way to manage resources and to access information. So K9s is actually a Kubernetes client. You install it on your own machine, and you can connect to any cluster. There's nothing that needs to be installed in the cluster that you need to access. But it's a rich Kubernetes cluster. It actually provides an interface, a CLI interface, to access the resources. It's a Golang binary, and it uses key bindings that are similar to Vim. So if you're used to Vim, you will find your way around K9s very quickly. It's also skinnable and pluggable. I'll show you in this presentation. So K9s has lots of commands. The commands that you use using a colon, just like in Vim, you colon followed by the command and then enter. And all these commands can be listed by typing Control-A. So if you type Control-A, you will see the list of all the resource types that are available in your cluster, plus some specific features available in K9s that can be accessed just the same way using colon with the name of the resource or the name of the feature. And then for each resource or feature, you can have the command, and optionally they can be shortcuts. And these shortcuts are usually just the shortcut for the resource type in Kubernetes, or they can be shortcuts that are specific to K9s, or shortcuts that you have defined yourself, as you can define shortcuts in K9s to access resources or features. In each of the views that you have in K9s, you have a contextual help. And it's contextual because depending on the view, the features can be different. If you're looking at pods or deployment or secrets and so on, you have different features, so you have different shortcuts. So all the shortcuts, some of the shortcuts you'll see are listed in the interface itself, but then if you type ? You'll see all the shortcuts available. These shortcuts are also contextual because they depend on the features available in your cluster. For example, here, it allows you to sort by CPU, by memory, and so on. This is in a pod view. This is available because there's a metric server that is deployed in this Kubernetes cluster. If there wasn't a metric server, then these features wouldn't be available. Whenever you're looking at objects in K9s, there's two options that you'll find pretty much all the time. One is describe and the other is YAML. This is pretty standard. That's what you do when you use kubectl. You can do kubectl describe or kubectl get minus or YAML. And because these are the main types of views that you want to have for Kubernetes resources, you find them everywhere in K9s. So you have the D key that will do a describe of the object and the Y key that does a YAML view of the object. And you see here, there's crumbs at the bottom, and this crumbs show that I've been in the pods view, and then I selected a pod and did D for describe. And here I was in the pods view, selected a pod, and did Y for YAML view. In every one of the views as well, you can search and filter using slash. So again, very similar to Vim. Here I was in the pods view, looking at all the pods from all the namespaces, and I typed slash Argo, and it filtered on Argo CD. So it can be filtered on namespace, on the name, or you can even filter by label with key equal value. So let's have a look at some of the views. This is one of the views that is called pods, obviously, and you access it by typing :pods or :pod or :po, the usual shortcuts that you find in Kubernetes for pods. And here I'm listing all the pods, and you see here that I can filter by namespace. So here the namespaces correspond to shortcuts that are numbered. So 0 is always all, that's all namespaces. We list the pods from all the namespaces. And then here, there's some specific namespaces that I can filter on. And these namespaces appear in the order in which I use them last. So these are the namespaces I already used before, so I can quickly access them. So if I type 4, for example, I would access only the pods. I will list only the pods in the ARGO CD namespace. If the metric server is deployed in your cluster, you'll have metrics. You see here there's columns for the CPU used, memory used, CPU and memory percentage of request and limits. And you can also sort by column, by age, CPU, and so on. All the sorting options can be accessed by, again, requesting the contextual help. So you just type ? and you'll see which shortcuts you can use to filter by column. You can open a shell with S, you see here. So you just choose the line you want, the pod you want, and type S. If there are several containers in the pod, it will ask you which container you want to log into. Obviously, this requires a shell inside the container. So containers from scratch will not work with this, just as in Kubernetes, as in kubectl. There's a shortcut with the key I for replacing images directly. So you can edit a pod and replace the image. And you can also access logs and port forward a port from a pod onto your machine. So how does that work? First, the logs. If you press L on a pod, you'll get concatenated logs. This means that all the pods, all the containers in the pod will appear. Or if you're listing the logs on a deployment, the logs of all the pods in the deployment will be concatenated as well. So in a very similar fashion to what you get in Docker Compose, for example, when you're looking at the logs, it will add a column in front of the logs with the name of the container or the name of the pod if you're in the deployment view when you type L. You can also add timestamps here. I turn on the timestamps with the key T. You can switch wrap on. So here the wrap is on. I have some lines that go on onto a second line. If the wrap was off, I would just have one line per log. And you can switch to full screen as well. I didn't do this so we can see the interface fully. In these logs, you can still search and filter using /, and auto scroll is set on by default. You can also use the 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on shortcuts to see either all the logs or just the last minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and so on and so forth. Port forward is a pretty powerful thing. It's the exact same feature you get with kubectl port forward, except you can do it directly from K9S. And so what you do is that when you're on a pod or a service, you just type Shift F, and that will open a contextual field that will ask you which port you want to port forward and to which point and where. So by default, it will detect the container and the port that are defined in the pod, and it will redirect to the same port on localhost. So you just need to do OK, and it will start a port forward on your machine. This is extremely useful if you're used to port forwarding already in kubectl. It helps to debug internal APIs to the cluster that are not exposed through ingresses or load balancers. So it helps to understand the plumbing inside your cluster. For example, when you have containers that use an ambassador type of container inside the pod for authentication, for example, you can access directly the port which is not authenticated proxified through the Kubernetes API, so you can see what's happening with that going through the proxy. The port forwards can be listed as objects using colon port forward as a command in K9s. All the port forwards are stopped when you quit K9s, which, by the way, you can quit with Control-C or with colon Q, obviously, colon quit, just like in Vim. So you don't need to worry about your port forwards when you quit K9s. It will stop them. And there's a pretty cool feature integrating another tool by Jana Dogen, which is benchmarking. So when you move to a port forward, you can launch a benchmark. It will benchmark your application and give you a report. This is what we have here. And this screenshot, you can see the result of the benchmark on one of the pods. And so you can see here in the crumbs, I went through the pods view, selected a pod, did a port forward, went into the port forward, started a benchmark, and I'm looking at the results. When you want to go out in the crumbs, you just press escape, just like in Vim, and you will go back to the benchmarks and then back to the port forwards and then back to the pods. Just as you can look at pods, you can obviously look at deployments as well. So here I'm looking at all the deployments. Again, the way I cut the screenshots, I don't see the shortcuts, but they're also listed in the full view. You can have the logs, and again, this concatenates all the pods, so this is pretty cool. I still don't know a way to do this in kubectl, because in kubectl, if you do kubectl logs deploy / the name of the deployment, it will actually show you logs from the deployment, but it will pick a pod, and then it will only show you the logs from this specific pod. It won't concatenate them. You can actually scale the deployments directly from K9s as well with the S key. So just choose the number of replicas you want. You can replace the image of the container if there's only one container. And you can roll back the replica sets in the replica set view. So you type :rs or replica set to see the replica sets, select the replica set, and there's a shortcut to roll back to this version. You can view config maps and secrets as well. And a pretty cool feature I find is that you can decode secrets directly in K9s. So if you're on the secrets line, you just press X and it will decode the secrets. And then once you're viewing the secrets, and pretty much in most of the views, you can press C to copy the contents directly to your copy buffer, which means you can easily paste it somewhere else without having to deal with the columns and all the spaces that might be around them and so on. Another very cool feature is RBAC integration, which allows you to see role bindings and cluster role bindings in the form of a table inside K9s. So you just type colon role bindings or colon cluster role bindings, select one, press enter, and you'll see a nice view like this. Here we're looking at the Cert Manager Controller certificates role bindings, cluster role bindings actually, which shows which resources this role binding has access to and which rights it has on them. So very useful when you're used to looking at the YAML version. This is pretty much impossible to understand. There's Helm integration as well, native in K9s. So if you deploy Helm charts in there, you can just type colon Helm and you'll see your charts. You can press enter to describe the chart. And in a very cool way, if you press Y for the YAML view, you'll actually see the rendered resources from the Helm chart displayed as a single manifest. So this is extremely useful to visualize what your Helm chart actually deployed in your cluster. And if you're doing Helm, you might be interested in ARGO CD as well. So if you have ARGO CD running, K9s work on all kinds of resources, including CRDs. So all your CRDs, including applications from ARGO CD or certificates from Cert Manager, or I don't know, any kind of CRDs you might have deployed in your cluster will work. They may not have special features, but you will be able to list them and to look into them and describe them and look at the YAML versions. So here, ARGO CD integration is pretty simple, but you can see the names, the status, health status, revision directly in K9s and look at the YAML manifest for each of them. And you see here I have something a little bit special, which looks like an integration to sync an application. And this is actually a plugin. So you can define plugins in K9s in the form of YAML files in the .k9s directory in your home directory. So here I define a plugin for ARGO CD saying that in the scope of applications, if you press Control S and the description is sync application, then it will run ARGO CD app sync with the name of the application you're currently looking at. So if I'm on a specific line, I've highlighted this line, it will take the value in the name column and pass it so I can force the synchronization. And note that because this is ARGO CD, it will require me to do an ARGO CD logging before I launch K9s, obviously. So you can add lots of plugins for this. Some people use this for KSniff, for example, or other tools that interact with Kubernetes resources. The views can be modified as well. So you can change the columns again by type. So here for applications, I want to see name, sync status, health status, and revision. For any of the views of any of the objects, you can select which columns you'd like to see and in which order. And there's some special cool features integrated on top of this in K9s. Xray is one of them. So you type colon Xray followed by a type of resources, for example, pods or deployments. And it gives you a hierarchical view of these resources and other resources that are linked to them. So here we can see the pods, and by namespace, you see the pods here with the service accounts that are running, as well as the secrets associated to them. And you can obviously scroll through this, select an object, click on it, and you'll see details of this object. So this is a really cool way to access the objects in your cluster. I'm actually hoping that ARGO CD application might get something like this at some point in K9, so you could access ARGO CD applications in Xray and see all the resources that are managed by the application. Popeye is another tool that was created by the same developer that made K9s. And it's integrated directly into K9s. So you just type colon Popeye, and it's a quality assurance tool that shows you details of resources in your cluster and checks the quality of the resources, the good practices of these resources, and it gives you a score. So here, if you have 100 in score, that's good. If you have 0, there's probably things that are bad or really bad. So you can click on them and you'll see details of what exactly is wrong with the way you're doing things in your cluster and what you should be doing to be using the good practices for your resources. And again, it's a real-time view like all the views, so it refreshes automatically. And finally, there's a polls view, which is a dashboard that gives you an idea of how many deployments, how many replica sets, how many stateful sets, and so on you have inside your cluster. So you can just keep this as a radiator view of your cluster in your terminal. You can have skins. There's several skins that are available on the website that you can change, and they're pretty much simple YAML files with color fields. So you can put HTML colors in there and choose the colors you want. So there's already skins for black and white, for solarized. I like the default one, actually. I'm not changing it, but this is another thing that I'm showing you here. I'm just gonna do a quick demo to show you what it looks like in real life, and then I'll take some questions. So I just started my K9s here. One thing you can do is look at context. So colon CTX here will show me context. I only have one here because I cleaned my kubeconfig before starting. And you can switch context here. If you have several contexts in your kubeconfig, you can switch the context. So let's have a look at the pods. So here I have all the pods, but I could actually filter. An easy way to do this is to type colon NS or namespace, and here I see the list of namespaces, and I can select one. If you don't know the shortcuts, again, you can do Control-A and see all the available comments. So here, if I want namespaces, I'll just scroll down to namespaces, press Enter, and I have the namespaces, and then I can select the namespace I'm interested in. And here I'm seeing all the pods. I can switch to deployment here, for example, with colon deploy there. And I can scale. I could scale this one, for example. I'll type S, scale to 4. And here we go. And I can see things happening in the pod view here. I see the container starting. If I press enter on a pod, I actually see every single container with their image and what's actually happening in there. If I want to access directly one of these containers inside the cluster, I can do a port forward like I showed here. So instead of accessing through the proxy, I want to bypass the proxy in this case. So I'll just do HTTP 1990. There we go. And I will be able to open, oops, where is this? Here. A web browser, point to localhost 1990. And here we go. It should be loading, hopefully. There, it's just my application is a little bit slow. There we go. It's actually a course we're going to teach this next week. A colleague of mine will teach this course next week, and the course slides are running in the cluster in which we're teaching the course. So here I can access it. Normally there's a proxy in front for authentication. If I press F, I access the port forwards directly or with colon port forward. And you can see the port forward here. And I can run Ctrl-L and it will start a benchmark on this pod. And once the benchmark is finished, it didn't finish well. No, yeah, here it is. The benchmark is here. And I can, again, press enter and see the result of the benchmark with the response time, the latency, and so on. And I can keep it there and access it later if I want. Let's look at the Xray view here with the pods. And you can see here all the things I can access here. This is pretty cool. And again, in each view, you can press question mark and see the different shortcuts you have. I'll just show you the Popeye view again here, because you had a very quick review. So here, there are some warnings on some of my resources here. So if I click on the deployments, for example, here it tells me I'm using an image tag latest. This is a pretty bad idea. And there's no resources requests or limits that are defined for this container. It would be a good idea to define limits. So there, I think we saw most of the interesting features in there. Do you have any questions?
So thank you, Raphaël. So far, there is no question in the chat. There is only for K9. There is one question afterward for Loic, in case. But so far for K9, I think it's as well, we have to wait a little bit the delay, but there is no questions. So we can keep a couple of seconds, and like this, after we can move on to ask the question to.
And I see that actually the remark for Loic is by Fernand Galiana, who is the developer of K9s. So if you have questions for K9s, about K9s, you can ask them to Fernand in the chat. Thanks for being here.